I'm here today with Amanda Cleary Eastep. Amanda is a senior developmental editor at Moody Publishing and the author of Tree Street Kids middle grade series. She's not related to Beverly Cleary, but wishes that she was. She is, however, a children's author, and the Tree Street Kids is her middle grade series. Amanda knows kids because she's still one at heart. When she's forced to act like an adult, she edits nonfiction books for grown-up authors, or by grown-up authors. Amanda lives and writes in the mountains of North Carolina, but has spent most of her life in the suburbs of Chicago, where her characters now live. And you can learn more at treestreetkids.com. So Amanda, it's wonderful to meet you, and thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to meet you and talk with you, Brian. I'm happy to be here
Same
in our
here.
little squares.
Yeah, exactly. So to get started, is there anything that you'd like people to know about you that I didn't touch on?
Oh gosh, the whole kid at heart thing. The older I've become and the older I keep getting, the more I'm realizing how important it is for us to keep like this childlike curiosity for so many different reasons. And I'm really passionate about that. So, and I don't think we just need that as children's authors, or even just as writers. I think we need it as people of faith. I think we need to nurture our curiosity as people who want to understand others. So that's becoming more and more important to me as a person.
Well, good for you. I mean, it's a great perspective for us to kind of keep remembering. It's difficult the older that I get, at least.
Yeah,
So,
it just calls us to maybe get down on the floor if we can. Once in
yes,
a
exactly.
while. And, sift through Lego or something.
Well, I'm in the grandparent stage, so I've got 4 grandkids between
Oh,
the ages of
yeah.
3 and 9. So yeah, there's a lot of, on the floor or what.
And kids help us do that.
Yeah.
They're tremendous catalysts for helping us stay curious for sure. Uh,
So tell folks more about your background. How did you get involved in writing and publishing?
mhm. Well, I think similar to a lot of writers, I've loved writing and reading books since I was a kid. I was the nerdy bookworm. I'm still the nerdy bookworm. Um, and so it began there. It began with just a love of books and writing my own stories. And that progressed into eventually when I had, and then I went to school. I was in journalism. I've always been immersed in it. When I had children, I started writing for kids. So I had some things published in like Ladybug magazine, and I was doing Sunday school curriculum. And and then sadly, those things, the thing that I love to do the most, which was writing for children, fell to the side a bit. I think, as writers tend to do, we sometimes think what we're doing is not valuable.
Mm,
So it was like, well, I really should, I can keep writing, but I should really do it for, some kind of income. And
mm.
so, and I got busy with raising my kids. And so I did some column writing. I always tried to hold on to some kind of writing that was geared toward family or children. But then it was like, then I was marketing, doing marketing writing and writing for corporations and writing for higher ed. And then I was teaching college. So I always stayed somehow immersed in writing and or books, but I moved away from the children's writing a little bit. I kept reading children's books though, and never stopped doing that. And then it was, oh gosh, I guess it was when I started at Moody, and I had this moment, and you have these moments as you get older where it's like, what am I going to be when I grow up? What do you really want to do? Well, I kept my day job as an editor, but I thought this is the time for me on these long train rides into the city
Mm.
to go back to your children's writing. And I pulled an old young adult fantasy out of, you know, the cellar and started working on that, and it just kind of snowballed from there. So
Wow.
I'm in a sweet spot right now. Yeah.
So I want to talk about Tree Street Kids in a minute, but let's talk about your work at Moody first. As
Mhm.
I mentioned, you're a developmental editor. Can you clarify for folks, what that means versus acquisitions editor, for instance?
Right. I think a lot of people are familiar with the whole acquisitions editor. And then, so they acquire the books. And then what happens is the dun 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 dun, the author's book then goes to the developmental editor. Right. So they're the ones who mark it up and track changes and give you all the really hard feedback as an author. And so it's a tough job. It's a tough job because you can tend to feel like like you should apologize as you hand the
Mhm.
manuscript back. But it's also, to me, a really beautiful relationship where you are trying to um, bring, as we like to talk about at Moody, bring the book maybe from here to here. But there's that aspect of it, but then there's this aspect relationally of I want to honor my authors and their vision, um, but also my reader and my publisher. So you're kind of really doing all those things at once as you're helping the author just bring the book to a different level, a higher level.
Mhm.
So that could be through the different line edits that need to be made. That could be, hey, let's move these chapters around. Hey, what about taking this in a different direction or adding an illustration? There's just so many different parts of that developmental process.
And so it's mostly adult nonfiction?
Mostly adult nonfiction, doing a little bit more middle grade fiction as far as editing. Moody's been looking into that a little bit more, moving into that space
Hmm.
more. So, which I'm super excited about. And yeah, so, but that, working in the nonfiction was a good, I think, separation, not separation, but a break for me as a writer myself, where I wasn't immersed in other people's kid lit, and I could say, okay, day job is, this part of my brain, nonfiction, and then, in the wee hours, I get to delve into children's fiction. So
Hmm.
it's been interesting to do both.
Hmm. Hmm. And so how many books per year do you typically work on for Moody?
Oh, well, Moody, the publisher, does about 60 titles a year.
Hmm.
And so I might work on, oh, between, I kind of, I'm not really sure, maybe 13 to 15 books.
Okay.
Um, and sometimes I'll just give feedback on, parts of a project, but, the whole book, entire manuscript, probably more like, 13 books or
Hmm.
so.
Hmm.
But,
And what types of books are Moody most interested in these days?
well, I typically work on books. I do a lot of the women's Bible study line.
Hmm.
I'll edit a lot of those books. I work a lot with pastors
Hmm.
who write. So kind of Christian living and Christian spiritual formation. And then we've, I think, been really doing a really intentional move into working with diverse authors. So that's been a real joy to work with that. Yeah, and then just like I said before, just a little step in the direction of children's books, children's fiction, so and nonfiction, and we have some children's Bible studies coming out too.
Oh,
So
good.
that's been
Good.
really exciting.
Good. So let's get to your own work, Tree Street Kids. How did that come about?
It was as the Lord tends to be. It's kind of a very complex and convoluted and mysterious story that I won't get into, I guess. But I For me, it was when I was talking a little bit ago about that with you about when I started at Moody and I used that train ride to get back to my children's fiction, not
Mhm.
knowing where it was going to go, what was going to happen with it, but being more directly involved with publishing, of course, gives me the opportunity to know more people and to have, some really good connections. I had spent many years prior to that, especially as a younger writer, clawing and scratching at doors and going to conferences and doing the pitch and babbling on. Please read my book, kind of thing. So I had done a lot of that as well. And but that train time, I really had some conversations, some tough conversations with God saying, okay, here I am, I'm editing other people's books, and you know how much I want to publish my own books. I mean, come on, God, kind of conversations. And so as I was working on I was working on young adult fantasy. I'd started several years before and just enjoying it, just getting on that train, putting the earbuds in, had my Jamba Juice and working away on the quiet car of the train from the city back into the suburbs. And and for me, it really felt like an act of obedience. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know where this book's going, but you need to do this. One, because God put it on your heart and because you love doing it. And so that was the first step. And in the meantime, not long after that, I was working with a colleague at Moody. We weren't, we were no longer doing any new fiction. We hadn't been for a very long time. And um, we were part of this, the two of us had kind of started this initiative to say, hey, can we start looking at some of our backlist stuff was still selling really well. So Sugar Creek Gang was a long time series at Moody, a children's series. Our Daughters of the Faith series, those kind of books were still selling well. And we're like, are there some things we could, bring back to life, that haven't been printed in a while? Could we look at some new things? And my colleague said, why don't you pitch a series? You are immersed in this stuff. You love it. This is your passion. And I said, I don't know. It's a little awkward. I'm usually all about awkward, Brian, but it was, just kind of one of those, well, I work for the publisher, this kind of thing. But I said, well, I'll pray about it. And he's like, I knew that's what you would say. Um, so I spent a few months kind of making a mental shift because I was so immersed in young adult, which is 13 to 17, making kind of this mental shift into middle grade because I knew there was some interest in middle grade from Moody and, from the 8 to 12-year-old age range. So I just the story started, kind of pouring out the ideas, the premise, the characters, and I really based it a lot on my kids growing up in the 90s. So this series is set in the 90s, which a lot of parents are really digging. They're really feeling nostalgic about about the story. So they're enjoying reading with their kids or to their kids. And I pitched it, and my publisher really liked it. It went through all the committees that it was, needed to go through. And because you still have to do your due diligence and just like anybody else does. And so that's how it happened.
Wow.
And
So
here we
how
are
many?
4 books later, and
Okay, so
my head's spinning.
that's what I was going to ask. There's 4 books in the series now.
Yeah. Yeah, so 2 came out in April of 21. That was Jack versus the Tornado and The Hunt for Fang were the first 2. And then Lions to the Rescue and Mystery in Crooked Creek Woods. I love tongue twisters, if you haven't noticed. Those came out in July. So there's 4 right now.
Okay. So I have to ask this since, it was written in the, set in the 90s in Chicago. Well, in the 90s in Chicago, since I'm from that area myself, I know that was when Michael Jordan was in his prime and the Chicago Bulls were winning all these NBA championships. So does that enter into any of the stories?
That's a really good point, and not yet so far. Do talk about baseball, and the third book is there's so much great stuff from the 90s. There's so many good things, but yeah, Michael Jordan hasn't made it in yet. That's you're giving me ideas though.
Good, good. Well, I'd be glad to collaborate on that one if you want to.
How could you not mention Michael Jordan?
Well, when I think of Chicago in the 90s, that's the first thing, again, since I was a Bulls fan since a little kid.
Oh, I know. My mom and my grandmother were Bulls fans. I mean, you could not talk to my mother and my grandmother if there was a Bulls game on.
That's great. That's great. So it sounds like you have plans then for future books in the series.
Well, I'm working on some ideas, and I don't know, what the future holds. So we will see. We will see. We will see if other people are as excited about it as I am.
Have you thought about going back into YA and doing any books there?
Oh, for sure. That young adult fantasy is always, back here kind of nagging at me, and I would like to do that. I have 3 picture books that I've worked on over the last few years, and so those are, I've got this day job, Brian, and I don't.
These things get in the way, don't they?
Yeah, I love it. I love that job, and I love what I do. But yeah, then it leaves little less writing time during the day. Plus, I live on 7 acres, and for some reason, the lawn needs to be mowed. Well, my husband does that, but there's so much work to do out in the country.
Wow. Well, that's all exciting. I'm so glad. I mean, you're such a versatile writer. I mean, to be able to do these different age groups and genres, and it's really fascinating.
Here's the thing. I love doing it, Brian, but whether or not somebody thinks I'm good at it is a whole other thing.
Well, I doubt that, but in any event. So, Amanda, it's so great to be able to meet you and speak with you. Congratulations on all your work, and I wish you the best with, the future endeavors too. I hope you can pry away more time to make some of those things happen. And as I mentioned before, you can check out all of Amanda's work at treestreetkids.com. So, Amanda, thanks so much for joining us and sharing a piece of your life with us.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It was really fun. I could talk with you all day.
Sounds good.